So just a quick recap then, regarding the fourth law of thermodynamics. I've written 3 articles. The first was released back in 2010. The second article came out in 2011, and the third and latest one in 2020. The first article in 2010, it simply introduced the phrase EU equals 0 equals paradise, and that the universe essentially seeks a paradise ground state, and that it was always meant from the beginning of the universe for it to discover this state, and that universal life plays an essential role in the universe achieving this paradise state, suggesting that the very role of any universal life form is to convert mass energy to love and intelligence. Actually, as the second article from 2011 delves into, it is when life develops at much higher levels up here, beyond where we humans are down here, that life will begin to consume mass energy and transform it to higher forms of love and intelligence at a much higher rate, which conversion we too are engaged in here on Earth, just at a slower conversion rate. So we too have always been cultivating love and intelligence here on Earth, but at a much slower rate. But we have always moved in the right direction because the universe was created with limited amount of energy and mass. It is the same conversion pattern principle for all life forms in the universe, but up here, the second article predicts that we can see it via universal expansion, but that we too remove a little bit of mass energy, which we store as love and intelligence, but that we can't see the effect since it happens at a much lower rate compared to up here. Up here, we're talking about 100% love and intelligence, which represents the full potential of the universe. The first article in 2010 just introduced the expression EU equals 0 equals paradise, and then went on to implement the Nash equilibrium to describe it mathematically. By interpreting Nash equilibrium into that expression, meaning that Nash equilibrium mathematically describes the love-producing solutions in natural chaos. Like natural chaos, that is, entropy and the like. This stems from the universe being created with a limited amount of mass energy, being the second law of thermodynamics. So I interpret this to mean that Nash has in fact mathematically described the fourth law of thermodynamics mathematically. So he is actually the great hero here, really, the truly significant scientific hero. What I'm essentially doing is more taking the works of various great scientists and attempting to piece them together. So every time I see that science aligns with that, which began as a philosophical concept, I've seen that I can add more and more truly robust scientific backing to it. For the past 10 years since the first article then, I've focused less on the word paradise. The word paradise I've actually just introduced as a term that's meant to describe 100% love and intelligence. That is what we truly seek, what we ultimately want, isn't it? Moreover, that this paradise place should actually exist, and that it was planned or programmed from the beginning that the universe would eventually become an eternal paradise. Because then the paradise state coincides with what the universe always does, which is to seek its absolute lowest possible energy state. But I believe that this reduction in universal energy state also applies to life's experience of the lower energy state, love and intelligence. The idea is that the universe will manage that by using life as a catalyst to convert mass energy to love and intelligence. And then, in 2011, the second article was published on headbiotech.com, which stated that the constant expansion of the universe could actually also be explained by this behavior, suggested in the fourth law of thermodynamics. Because these life forms, which are meant to develop in the way the fourth law of thermodynamics, described ever since 2010, are actually supposed to start converting mass energy much faster up here, meaning those life forms that are much more advanced than us. They probably just appear as nothing more than a vast enormous swarm that simply devours its way through the entire universe, transforming all mass energy into pure love and intelligence. And this very same development here will then also explain why our universe is expanding at an ever-increasing rate. But that is a stage that has been an obstacle. You must keep in mind that the first law of thermodynamics, which speaks about how all mass and energy in the universe are constant, it cannot in this instance be considered valid, the first law of thermodynamics, which concerns constant mass and energy. It does apply within our field of observation. In our immediate vicinity, it functions perfectly. But according to the fourth law of thermodynamics and the second paper, it cannot be universal valid. And now we are moving on to the very last article, the third article from 2020, which specifically addressed that the fourth law of thermodynamics was able to explain the bizarre wave-particle duality in quantum mechanics. We have here the well-known quantum mechanical experiment where they discover and conclusively proved that electrons, which are of course fundamental quantum particles, actually behave in a wave-like form. This means that if we send an electron or quantum particle through this filter with these two slits, they observe them as they arrive at the detector back here. When it then captures the electrons on the back side of these slits, we see that the electrons behave in wave form, like if it was water being sent through the slits here. But then that's the straightforward part. That was how they demonstrated that electrons fundamentally exist in a wave-like form. But the bizarre aspect, the so-called wave-particle duality phenomenon, which Einstein, Bohr, and their contemporaries could never fully agree upon. Even to this very day, there's truly no one who can adequately explain it. Why should a quantum wave excite to particle form just because a human observes it? The third article discusses how nature can know, and why it also seems to look into the future and know beforehand that we are about to observe the quantum world. So that's the third article then. The final article in the series, which could use the logics in fourth law of thermodynamics to explain wave-particle duality, because according to fourth law, it's not so strange anymore. Because the way that nature manages to know the truth about intelligent intentions, to measure evil and good qualities, should be picked up in this manner. So the point is that the universe has a meaningful relationship to paradise and hell, or good and evil qualities, and that it goes via changes in universal energy states. And that it is picked up by the universe. The universe's view on good qualities is what we actually find in free competition, in other words, in chaos, and what nature considers bad qualities, according to the fourth law of thermodynamics, is what we find when there is constant abundance, when we remove chaos. Because without natural chaos, the Nash equilibrium also stops functioning in this game, and the universe also stops seeking towards paradise. Theoretically, it could start seeking towards hell instead, but universally speaking, that shouldn't be possible, because the universe itself is created with limited energy. But at least in theory then. And it would be a little strange why suddenly the universe would decide to change its mind in the middle of the process and start turning towards hell. So what I gather from this, what I picture in my mind, is that the universe was actually created to lead to paradise, right from its very inception. And then it has a way to understand that path. It naturally has security barriers, so it needs to know if evil characteristics gain power or not. There must be some mechanisms to guarantee it won't revert to a state where evil traits can accumulate power in the universe. So, what is being suggested regarding the wave-particle duality phenomenon is that the experiment will be able to provide proof for the underlying logic of the fourth law of thermodynamics, because, according to the theory, nature must know the truth concerning the true intent to both negative and positive intelligent intent in nature. Since this should operate through changes in universal energy states, nature is probably extremely sensitive. As this wave-particle duality experiment shows that it's sensitive right down to the quantum level. However, here nature can't distinguish the bad people from the good people. Here it's just demonstrate its sensitivity and mechanism. No matter what a human being truly is, or if perhaps even higher life forms had observed this experiment, that quantum wave would still have excited to particle form because nature, in a way, just locks itself. Because we aren't nice enough, but it is, It's not expected that we should actually be accepted here at these levels. Nature simply reacts. We are simply not on the same love level, are we? So we are not nice enough. You might say that we are kind, but we're not kind enough to truly be at these higher levels, where we're speaking of 100% love and 100% intelligence. So that's what the most recent article is addressing. And since I'm touching upon quantum physics, I should bring up Einstein. I briefly mentioned this in the first article from 2010, but I bring his work up again now. I just mentioned it in one line in the first article from 2010. I mentioned that it was perhaps an interesting observation that the paradise state might have something to do with light because of Einstein's related formula. But now I have actually brought this topic up again at the very end of the discussion within the third article. I'm just bringing it up once more in this presentation after I released the third article. Since I have now acquired new knowledge that allows me to have achieved a small philosophical breakthrough, by applying Einstein, I can avoid having to use that paradise word in the formula. If we can manage to transfer that paradise word onto a physical constant, and not just any random constant, but in fact Einstein's c² constant from his well-known related energy and mass law, and he has already proven his equation. This has been mathematically proven and is rock solid. So, if my fourth law of thermodynamics is also correct and universally applicable, as Einstein's related formula is, which is, of course, you can say what you will about it, but only if it is valid. If I hit the bullseye with it, then it should be possible to replace the word paradise with that constant there. That is the speed of light squared, and then... But I have already spoken about that before, and that was as far as I got in the third article. But what I'm addressing now is... Now, all of a sudden, we could be sitting with some information about what paradise truly is. By integrating the two equations, one could say that paradise is made up of waves, since light has something to do with waves. That there are no particles there, but just a place full of waves. And then a new name comes to mind. Another truly brilliant scientist. You see, what really distinguishes the greatest is their profound understanding of mathematics. They are able to prove theories and findings to become undeniably and absolutely true. That is why there is also so much power in science. Because if you can prove something mathematically, then there is no longer possible to start arguing against it. Then it is true. So this new version of the formula has become quite exciting, hasn't it? If that particular law is indeed true, then one could probably establish this Einstein-derived version of it. That c² would likely describe paradise, that it's a place completely full of waves. And then this new name, Fourier, comes up. A man named Joseph Fourier from the 18th century. He was able to mathematically prove that waves, they are actually the fundamental building blocks of all other shapes. In a mathematical world, we can create all kinds of other shapes by using waves as a unit, by combining waves in various ways, by having them harmonize with each other in terms of their frequencies and so on. Then you can create all sorts of different shapes. We can make squares, we can build houses. We can simply perfectly copy the entire world that we see around us here in the physical realm. But only in a mathematical world, and that world we are simply not able to perceive or to participate within. But then comes the final philosophical leap, where one envisions what paradise could be. And what we are truly interested in, can we reach paradise? By positioning ourselves on the side of the fourth law, can we reach paradise? How are we to reach paradise? What I'm saying is that we must ally ourselves with God. We must ally ourselves with nature. We must do as they have done up here. We must make sure that we ally ourselves with nature. But I won't spend time on it. It's a political matter. It just becomes politics out of it right away. However, I maintain to suggest that we still have chaos. That we don't permanently anchor the earth with constant abundance, because then, according to the fourth law, evil properties would prevail without us being able to perceive it, wouldn't we? It would be a pleasant facade for that, but theoretically and mathematically speaking. Mathematically, we can use mathematics against harmful properties and prove it mathematically that it is extremely dangerous. It can be extremely dangerous. But I don't think there's any way around it regardless. So I believe that from the very moment it all began, long ago, and even when the universe was first created, this paradise fate was predetermined. The universe knew it would end in paradise. So this small window of time we're living in this part of the universe here right now, probably, as I speculate, has triggered us to achieve constant abundance and eventually zero risk. Zero risk with malicious intent. Then nature must have a mechanism that it reacts with, and that is what I also address in the third article, How Nature Responds. This experiment is a description of how nature has its feelers extended throughout the entire universe. As soon as it detects negative attributes, or rather if zero risk is attained, it then transmits a quantum signal, and that nature can react in precisely the same manner as it does in the wave-particle duality experiment. Here in wave-particle duality, we actually see how nature might have a way of responding when it meets and discovers something it cannot approve of as part of itself, the paradise state, right? A foreign element, you could say. And in this case, evil characteristics at a certain critical level. But we can all be a little naughty, that's how we humans are. We are far from perfect, but we're not expected to be perfect at this level. But this sensitivity is what is being demonstrated here. The wave-particle duality then really shows that nature has a way of responding to something it cannot yet fully accept or integrate into itself. And that would in this case then be all people, without it judging all people for that reason. So then I'll try to continue. Now there's only one thing left, really, for us to begin to imagine what paradise is. When we consider Einstein's mass-energy formula, E equals mass times c squared. When energy becomes zero, then things should be in paradise. When energy disappears from the universe, then only light remains according to Einstein's formula. And when mass and all mass energy disappears from my formula, then we are left with paradise. Then we can move Einstein's constant and replace the word paradise. Suddenly this gives us new insight. It provides us with a wealth of information about what paradise truly is. It consists of waves, doesn't it? And from the field of mathematics, we know that waves are actually the fundamental building blocks used to construct everything imaginable, all possible shapes and forms. And then suddenly we have the foundation for paradise to have its opportunity for realization. It has the building blocks required to replicate this world and to create an eternal lasting paradise. But the problem now is that that doesn't help us because it's becoming a mathematical world. Yeah, so that. But then comes the last puzzle piece, which could allow us to reach paradise. And that has to do with copying memories and thoughts. When we consider those life form levels up here, when we're down here, even we humans down here, we can actually copy some biological memories. Then we're talking about just very simple experiments. So the principle of copying a biological memory, that will probably be, I dare say, pure routine for these more advanced life forms up here. In the same way, just like we copy data files on our computers. So that part, I believe no one will say anything against, because it's actually completely realistic. The last thing that's missing then is if the advanced life form can copy our thoughts and our memories and integrate it to the paradise mathematical format. All that is required then is to convert our minds into a completely new format, a wave-based format that will enable us to truly experience the eternal mathematical world that will reside within paradise. So the only thing that is needed here now is to copy the memories over to a format that is suitable for the paradise world, the wave world, the mathematical world that exists within this world. And then all of a sudden we would have these same memories and thoughts as here, but in a different format. And suddenly we can start to experience the world in the very same way as it is here. I can sit just like this in paradise, really. The only thing is that then everything is perfect because there are no particle form. It's just on a mathematical pure wave format. Once we manage to transfer our memories and thoughts into that format, it becomes eternal. And then we start talking about this eternal paradise. Because then, in that state, the universe has finished its search. There are no lower universal energy states to pursue. So there is paradise. The end of the history for our universe will then be paradise for all eternity. And now I can summarize, and that's why I made the effort to make this video. I didn't want to write a separate article about it. So when I connect these two formulas together, then suddenly, if that's true, then suddenly we see the opening to how we can actually come to paradise. At least then we have built a kind of logical bridge. Because previously paradise has only been a word, and I haven't quite known what to make of it. Just that it's supposed to be a perfect world. So I know it might seem a bit messy here, but I just want to make sure I've documented all the points. And now I'll just conclude by combining Einstein's mass-energy equality with my fourth law of thermodynamics. Firstly, as the fourth law states, when all energy is zero in the universe, we are in paradise. Now let's move over to Einstein and ask him the same. We ask Einstein, what's going on here? What happens when mass energy is zero? Yes, well then actually just the constant c squared is left. It doesn't go to zero. It stays when mass energy vanish. So then I ask what's left here when mass energy vanish. In my formula, that's the paradise term that remains in my law. So there I replace c squared with the paradise term. Then okay, if it's correct. Okay, so if it is correct, we're sitting with a bit of information about paradise. It has something to do with light and waves, since light, of course, is waves. Okay, paradise is full of waves, so we'll use Fourier's proof to mathematically realize paradise for us, since waves can be used as building block to construct all other forms in a mathematical world. The problem is that we can't experience that paradise world just by someone copying our memories and thoughts. But if we are copied and then integrated into a new mathematical format, we can't really see and feel those forms without it, can we? So if we are simply transferred to a brand new format, a format that could suddenly be experienced, this boundless world comes alive. In that place, nothing ever breaks down or dies or things like that. There, everything is just perfect constantly in a mathematical world. But there has to be some kind of dynamic taking place there. So for instance, some might say, yes, but then the universe's energy state cannot be completely at zero and things like that. That's probably how these minor details are. But it's not that important. I see that logical and philosophical bridge over here. So I actually see that bridge, okay, that's the most important thing for now.